The text message was simple. 4 words that should have brought my mother running. Instead, her response made my blood freeze, and within 48 hours, it would make headlines across 3 states. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story begins with the most ordinary Tuesday morning that became the day I learned what family really means, and it wasn't what I thought. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The contraction started at 6:47 a.m. while I was buttering toast in our tiny kitchen at Sunridge Commons. David had already left for his early meeting at TechFlow Solutions, and I was savoring these last quiet moments before our lives changed forever. At 39 weeks pregnant with our first baby, I'd been having false alarms for days, but this time felt different. The pain wrapped around my lower back like a steel band, and I had to grip the counter until my knuckles went white. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just more Braxton Hicks contractions that had been tormenting me for weeks. But then another wave hit, stronger this time, and I glanced at the clock. Exactly 8 minutes later. Then another, and another. The pattern was unmistakable, and suddenly the cheerful yellow walls of our apartment felt too bright, too small, too far from everything I needed. David's phone went straight to voicemail. His presentation wasn't supposed to end until 10 a.m., and we joked just yesterday about how the baby would probably wait until the most inconvenient moment to arrive. Well, joke's on us. I called again, then sent a text, but I knew he'd have his phone silenced during the meeting. The next contraction hit harder, and I actually heard myself whimper. That's when I knew this was it. My hands shook as I scrolled through my contacts. Rebecca, my boss, lived clear across town. Maria was at her bakery, probably elbow-deep in morning prep, but Mom lived in Scottsdale Hills, just 25 minutes away. She'd been talking for months about how excited she was to be a grandmother, how she couldn't wait to help with the baby, how she'd drop everything when the moment came. I typed the message carefully, my thumbs clumsy on the screen as another contraction built. Labor started. Need ride to Valley Medical. David in meeting, can't reach him. Please come now. I hit send and waited, breathing through the next wave of pain. Surely she'd call immediately. Surely she'd be in the car within minutes. Her response came faster than I expected. I actually smiled when I saw her name pop up, relief flooding through me. Then I read the words. Call an Uber. I'm showing a house to the Hendersons this morning. Big commission. Can't leave now. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Read it again, then again. Call an Uber. To go to the hospital. To have her grandchild, while she showed a house for a commission? The next contraction hit like a truck, and I doubled over, my phone clattering to the kitchen floor. When I could breathe again, I picked it up with trembling fingers and typed back. Mom, I'm scared. The contractions are getting stronger. I need family with me. Her response was immediate. Sarah, you're being dramatic. First babies take forever. I'll be there this afternoon. The Hendersons are cash buyers. Cash buyers? More important than her daughter's labor? More important than her first grandchild's birth? I felt something crack inside my chest, not from the contraction this time, but from something deeper, something that had been building for years, but I'd been too loyal, too hopeful to acknowledge. I called an Uber with shaking hands, my vision blurring with tears and pain. The driver was a sweet older man named Carlos, who took one look at me and immediately turned off his music, drove carefully, and kept asking if I was okay. A stranger showed me more compassion in 20 minutes than my own mother had in her text messages. Valley Medical Center's labor and delivery ward was bustling with controlled chaos. Nurses moved efficiently between rooms, families gathered in waiting areas, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the first cry of a newborn. That should have been comforting, but all I felt was alone. The intake nurse, a kind woman named Jennifer, kept asking about my support person, my emergency contact, who was coming to be with me. My husband's on his way, I kept saying, which was true. David was racing from his meeting, but it would take him at least an hour to get through Phoenix traffic. My mom might come later, I added, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. Dr. Hayes arrived shortly after they got me settled in room 314. She'd been my OB/GYN through this entire pregnancy, had seen me through the early bleeding scare at 12 weeks, the gestational diabetes that required careful monitoring, the high blood pressure that had me on modified bed rest for the last month. She knew how much David and I had wanted this baby, how careful we'd been, how excited we were. "Where's your support team?" she asked, checking my cervix with practiced efficiency. Last appointment, you mentioned your mom was planning to be here. I couldn't meet her eyes. She's busy with work. Dr. Hayes paused, her hands stilling. Sarah, you're already at 6 centimeters. This baby is coming faster than we expected for a first-timer. Are you sure there's no one else we can call? That's when my phone rang, Rebecca's name on the screen. I answered gratefully, desperate for any friendly voice. Sarah, I just got your email about taking the day off for false labor. How are you feeling? I'm at the hospital, I managed between contractions. This isn't false labor. This is really happening. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Rebecca's voice, sharp and focused. Which hospital? I'm coming now. Rebecca, you don't have to. Which hospital, Sarah? Valley Medical, Labor and Delivery. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up before I could protest. Rebecca Chen didn't just say things, she did them. In the 3 years I'd worked at Bright Marketing Solutions, I'd watched her handle crisis after crisis with the same calm efficiency. She'd built the company from nothing, raised 3 kids largely on her own after his husband's deployment years ago, and somehow always made time for her employees when it mattered. 22 minutes later, she walked into my room carrying a bag from Sweet Dreams Pastries and wearing the expression of someone who had just witnessed a crime. Where is your mother? Showing a house, I whispered. And saying it out loud made it real in a way that hurt worse than the contractions. Rebecca set down the pastry bag and pulled out her phone. What's her number? Rebecca, please don't. Her number, Sarah. I was too tired, too scared, and in too much pain to argue. I gave her mom's contact information and watched as Rebecca stepped into the hallway.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Conversation, but I could see her through the glass door, her gestures sharp and precise, her expression growing darker by the minute. When she came back, her job was set in a way I recognized from difficult client meetings. Your mother just told me that real estate doesn't pause for dramatics, and that first-time mothers are notorious for overreacting. She said you'd be fine with the hospital staff. The next contraction hit me so hard I couldn't breathe, and when it passed, I was crying. Not from the pain, but from the crushing realization that my mother had just dismissed the birth of her grandchild as dramatics. To my boss, a woman she'd never met. She also said, Rebecca continued, her voice carefully controlled, that she hopes this experience teaches you to be more independent. Independent? During labor? While giving birth to her grandchild? David burst through the door at that moment, still wearing his presentation clothes, his hair wild from running his hands through it. I'm so sorry. I came as fast as I could. Traffic was insane. How are you? Is everything okay? The words tumbled out as he rushed to my side, taking my hand and pressing his forehead against mine. Your wife has been handling this beautifully, Dr. Hayes said, giving David a quick update. We're looking at maybe 2 more hours. Baby's doing great. Rebecca quietly gathered her things, preparing to leave now that David was here. But as she reached the door, she turned back. Sarah, what's your mother's full name and her business information? Why? Because someone who treats their daughter this way during one of the most important moments of her life deserves to face some consequences. Natural ones. David looked confused, but I was too exhausted to explain. I gave Rebecca the information, watching her type it into her phone with the same focused intensity she brought to everything else. Our daughter, Emma Rose Martinez, was born at 4:17 p.m. after what Dr. Hayes called a textbook delivery for a first-timer. She was perfect, 7 pounds, 2 ounces of wrinkled, screaming perfection. David cried when they placed her in his arms. I cried when I held her for the first time. Even Dr. Hayes got a little misty-eyed. My phone buzzed with congratulations texts from friends, coworkers, even our neighbors, but nothing from Mom. Not during labor, not after the birth announcement David posted on social media, not even when I sent her a photo of Emma's tiny face. It was Rebecca who broke the silence, arriving the next morning with coffee and a grim expression. Sarah, we need to talk about what happened yesterday. She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot.
It was a review on my mother's real estate business page, dated the day before. 5 stars, glowing comments about her professionalism and dedication, posted by someone named Patricia Henderson. The commission she chose over her daughter's labor, Rebecca said quietly. I did some research. Then she showed me another screenshot, a social media post from Mom's business page posted at 2:30 p.m. the day before, a photo of her shaking hands with a middle-aged couple in front of a large house, with the caption, "Another successful closing. The Hendersons found their dream home. Sometimes you have to prioritize the clients who appreciate your dedication. #real estate. #success. #dreams come true." Posted while I was in active labor. Posted an hour before Emma was born. I stared at the screen, David reading over my shoulder. The timestamp was clear, undeniable. While I was progressing from 7 to 10 centimeters, while I was pushing our daughter into the world, while David was cutting the umbilical cord, my mother was posing for photos and posting about client appreciation. "There's more," Rebecca said gently. She scrolled to the comments on the post. Dozens of congratulations from other real estate agents, friends, business contacts. And there, buried in the middle, was a comment from someone named Janet Morrison. "Linda, didn't your daughter just have a baby? Shouldn't you be at the hospital?" Mom's response, posted at 3:15 p.m. "First babies take all day. Business doesn't stop for false alarms. She'll understand when she's older." False alarms. At 3:15 p.m., I was fully dilated and pushing. Emma was born an hour later. Rebecca's expression was stone cold. "Your mother made a choice, Sarah. She documented that choice publicly, and now she's about to learn that choices have consequences." I should have stopped her, should have asked what she meant, and should have told her to leave it alone. But I was exhausted, heartbroken, and holding my newborn daughter while staring at evidence that my mother had chosen a commission check over my most vulnerable moment. So I said nothing, and Rebecca got to work. By that evening, Mom's post had been shared to 3 local Facebook groups dedicated to supporting new mothers. Not by Rebecca. She was too smart for that. But somehow the screenshots had found their way to mothers who recognized cruelty when they saw it. The comment section on Mom's business page began filling with a different kind of feedback. "Imagine prioritizing a house sale over your daughter giving birth. This is heartbreaking. That poor girl. I would never use a realtor who treats family this way." Mom called me at 11 p.m., her voice shrill with panic. "Sarah, people are attacking my business page. They're seeing horrible things about me. You need to tell them to stop." I was exhausted, sore, and trying to figure out breastfeeding with a baby who seemed determined to latch everywhere except where she was supposed to. "I haven't told anyone anything, Mom." "Well, someone did. This is ruining my reputation. I could lose clients over this." "You could have lost your daughter," I said quietly. "Don't be ridiculous. You're fine. The baby's fine. I told you I'd come later." "When, Mom? When exactly were you planning on coming?" Silence. Then, "I'm busy this week, maybe next weekend." Next weekend. 5 days after her grandchild was born, after the moment had passed, after the fear and pain and joy had faded into memory, after she could show up for the convenient parts without any of the messy reality. "Don't bother," I said, and hung up. David looked up from changing Emma's diaper. "Was that your mom?" "No," I said, and meant it. That was Linda Thompson. She used to be my mom. The next morning brought a steady stream of visitors to our hospital room. Maria arrived with homemade empanadas and tears in her eyes when she held Emma for the first time. Jake Williams stopped by after his paramedic shift ended, bringing David coffee and quietly mentioning that he'd heard about what happened through Rebecca. Word was spreading, but not in the gossipy, malicious way I'd feared. Instead, it was spreading the way truth spreads when people recognize something fundamentally wrong. Dr. Hayes made her final rounds around 10 a.m., checking Emma's vitals.
And my recovery progress. Everything looked perfect, she said, but her expression grew concerned when she asked about my support system at home. First-time mothers need help those first few weeks, she explained. Sleep deprivation is real, and having family support makes all the difference. I found myself explaining the situation, watching her face shift from professional concern to something harder to read. Dr. Hayes had been practicing obstetrics for 15 years. She'd seen every kind of family dynamic, every possible complication. But when I told her about Mom's response to my labor text, about the social media post during Emma's birth, her pen stopped moving on my chart. In 15 years of delivering babies, she said carefully, I've never heard of a grandmother choosing a real estate closing over her daughter's labor. That's not family conflict, Sarah. That's something else entirely. Rebecca returned that afternoon with an overnight bag and a determined expression. I'm staying until David can take time off work, she announced, setting up a small air mattress in the corner of our hospital room like it was the most natural thing in the world. Rebecca, you can't just move into the hospital, David protested. We'll be fine. Your wife sent her own mother a text saying she was in labor and scared, and that woman chose a house sale over being here. Nobody should go through their first days of motherhood wondering if their family cares enough to show up. Rebecca's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was steel underneath. Besides, I cleared my schedule. Delegating is good for my team. That evening, Rebecca's husband, Tom, arrived with takeout from our favorite Phoenix restaurant and a laptop bag. Tom Cheng had the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 20 years practicing family law. He greeted Emma with the gentle expertise of a father of three, but his conversation with Rebecca was conducted in hushed tones by the window. I caught fragments of their discussion. Pattern of behavior, documented evidence, emotional distress. When they finished talking, Tom approached my bed with the careful demeanor of someone delivering important news. Sarah, I want you to know that what happened to you yesterday wasn't just cruel family behavior. In some states, deliberately causing emotional distress to a pregnant woman can have legal implications. I'm not suggesting you pursue anything right now, but I wanted you to understand that your mother's actions crossed several lines. David looked confused. Legal implications for not visiting the hospital? Tom shook his head. Not for not visiting, for the deliberate nature of the abandonment, the public documentation of choosing money over her daughter's medical emergency, and the messaging that suggested Sarah was being dramatic about actual labor. There's a pattern here that goes beyond simple family drama. He pulled out his phone and showed us something I hadn't seen yet. Screenshots of Mom's social media activity from the day Emma was born. Not just the real estate post, but a series of posts throughout the day. A morning coffee photo captioned, "Starting another productive day." A lunch photo with "Business meetings fuel success." The house sale celebration. And then at 6 p.m., 2 hours after Emma was born, a post about treating herself to dinner at an expensive Scottsdale restaurant. She documented her entire day, Tom said quietly, a day when she knew her daughter was giving birth. She chose to create a public record of prioritizing everything else. The post painted a picture that was somehow worse than I had imagined. Not just neglect, but active celebration of the choices that kept her away from the hospital. Not just absence, but documented proof that she'd filled every hour with activities that mattered more to her than Emma's birth. Rebecca was taking notes on her phone, and I realized this wasn't just emotional support. This was strategic documentation. Why are you writing all this down? Because your mother made this public, Sarah. She created the narrative herself. And when someone hurts my people, I believe in making sure they understand the full consequences of their choices. Jake Williams stopped by again the next morning, this time in civilian clothes, carrying a card signed by his entire paramedic crew. "We heard what happened," he said simply. "The whole station's talking about it. We deal with family emergencies every day, and what your mom did, it's not normal, Sarah, not even close." He sat down heavily in the visitor chair, his expression serious. "Look, I've transported women in labor whose mothers drove 4 hours in the middle of the night to be there. I've seen grandmothers who made it to the hospital before the ambulance did. Last month, I picked up a lady whose mom chartered a private jet from Colorado because the baby was coming early. What your mom did, choosing a house sale over this, my crew has been in emergency medicine for years, and none of us have ever seen anything like it." David asked the question I'd been afraid to voice.
Is it really that unusual? Jake nodded emphatically. Brother, in my 5 years as a paramedic, I've never transported a laboring woman whose mother wasn't either already at the hospital or desperately trying to get there. Even estranged families find a way to show up for birth. Even mothers who haven't spoken to their daughters in years drop everything for grandchildren. This isn't family drama, David. This is abandonment during a medical emergency. His words hit differently coming from someone who dealt with crisis situations professionally. This wasn't emotional interpretation or family bias. This was a medical professional telling us that Mom's behavior was unprecedented in his experience of actual emergencies. Rebecca's phone had been buzzing steadily since yesterday, and I finally asked her about it. Her expression grew thoughtful as she scrolled through messages. The Phoenix marketing community is small, Sarah. Word travels fast when someone treats family badly. But this is more than gossip. People are genuinely disturbed by what happened. She showed me her phone screen, messages from other business owners, marketing professionals, even some of Mom's real estate colleagues. Not cruel attacks, but genuine concerned questions about whether the story they'd heard was accurate. Screenshots of Mom's social media posts were being shared not with malicious intent, but with genuine bewilderment that someone would document such callous behavior. Here's what's interesting, Rebecca continued. 3 different people have sent me stories about your mother's past behavior. Apparently, this isn't the first time she's prioritized business over family emergencies. She scrolled to a message from someone named Patricia Valdez. This woman says your mother missed her own father's funeral 5 years ago because she had a closing that day.
The successful sale while the family was at the cemetery. Another message from a neighbor in Mom's subdivision. She skipped her sister's cancer treatment appointment that she'd promised to drive her to because a potential client wanted to see houses that same morning. Posted about the productive day while her sister took an Uber to chemotherapy. David and I exchanged glances. I remembered the funeral. Mom had called to say she was unavoidably detained by business obligations. I remembered Aunt Carol mentioning transportation difficulties during her treatment, but I'd never connected it to Mom's absences. There's a pattern here, Rebecca said gently, and patterns tend to become visible when someone documents them as thoroughly as your mother does. She's been telling everyone exactly who she is for years. Yesterday just made it impossible to ignore. Tom returned that afternoon with a manila folder and a serious expression. Sarah, I've been looking into your mother's business practices, and there are some things you should know. He opened the folder to reveal printed copies of Mom's social media posts, her business reviews, and what appeared to be legal documents. 3 former clients have filed complaints with the Arizona Department of Real Estate over the past 2 years, all citing similar issues. Prioritizing personal convenience over professional obligations, failing to be available during critical moments in transactions, and what one complainant called a disturbing lack of empathy during stressful situations. The documents painted a picture of someone whose behavior with me wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of putting her own convenience above other people's emergencies. Clients whose deals fell through because she wouldn't work evenings. Buyers who lost houses because she prioritized showing properties to better prospects. A military family whose VA loan processing was delayed because she took a vacation during their time-sensitive approval window. The really interesting part, Tom continued, is that she's documented most of these incidents herself on social media. Vacation photos posted during client crises, restaurant check-ins during what she knew were stressful closing days for buyers. It's like she's been creating evidence of her own unprofessional behavior for years. Rebecca leaned forward. What does that mean legally? It means if anyone wanted to file a formal complaint about her conduct, there's an extensive paper trail of her own making. But more importantly, it means what happened to Sarah fits a documented pattern of behavior. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This is who your mother is, Sarah, and she's been proud enough of it to document it publicly. That evening, my phone started buzzing with notifications from social media platforms I rarely used. Mom had tagged me in a new post, and the notification count was climbing rapidly. Against David's advice, I opened the app to see what she'd written.
The post was a carefully crafted piece of damage control, featuring a professional headshot of Mom in her real estate blazer, and a lengthy caption about family misunderstandings and the challenges of balancing career success with personal obligations. She'd written several paragraphs about how some family members don't understand the dedication required for professional success, and how, unfortunately, timing doesn't always align with personal preferences. But what made my stomach turn was the final paragraph. While I'm disappointed that private family matters have been made public, I hope this serves as a learning opportunity for young mothers about the importance of preparation and realistic expectations. Successful people make arrangements in advance rather than expecting others to drop everything at a moment's notice. The comments section was already filling with responses, and they weren't the supportive messages Mom had probably expected. Her real estate colleagues were posting measured but pointed responses. "Linda, I drove 6 hours to be at my daughter's bedside when she was in labor. Family comes first." Another, "I've rescheduled million-dollar deals for family emergencies. That's what priorities look like." But it was the response from someone named Dr. Jennifer Walsh, OBGYN, that made Tom sit up straighter. "As a physician who has delivered over 3,000 babies, I can state with certainty that labor is not a timing preference or something that can be arranged in advance. This post demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of medical emergencies and appropriate family support." Rebecca was already screenshotting everything. "Your mother just made this so much worse for herself. She documented her complete lack of understanding about what happened, and she did it in a public forum where medical professionals could respond with factual corrections." More comments were appearing by the minute. Other mothers sharing their own experiences. "My mom flew across the country when I went into labor 3 weeks early. My mother-in-law left a board meeting to drive me to the hospital. Even my estranged mother showed up when her grandchild was being born." But the comment that made everything clear came from someone whose profile identified her as a nurse at Valley Medical Center. "I work in labor and delivery. I remember this situation from yesterday. The patient was alone during active labor until her boss arrived to provide support. In 20 years of nursing, I have never seen a mother choose a business meeting over her daughter's delivery. This post demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of medical emergencies and appropriate family support." David was putting his arm around me as I stared at the screen. "She's making it worse," he said quietly. "Every time she tries to justify what happened, she reveals more about who she really is." Rebecca's phone rang, and she stepped into the hallway to take the call. When she returned, her expression was grimmer than I had ever seen it. "That was Patricia Henderson, the client your mother prioritized over your labor." We all looked at her expectantly. Apparently, she saw the social media posts. She had no idea that Linda had a daughter in labor the day of their closing. She's horrified. She said if she'd known, she would have insisted on rescheduling immediately. Rebecca paused, consulting her notes. She also said something interesting. The closing could have been moved to any day that week. There was no urgency on their end. Your mother never mentioned any family emergency or asked to reschedule. Tom leaned forward. That's significant. It means your mother didn't just choose the closing over your labor. She chose to conceal your labor to protect a completely flexible business appointment. The weight of that revelation settled over the room. Mom hadn't been trapped by an unmovable obligation. She'd been presented with a choice and had actively concealed my situation to avoid even the possibility of having to reschedule.
Possibility of rescheduling? She'd let me believe she was locked into something unavoidable when the truth was she simply valued the commission more than being present for Emma's birth. Jake arrived for his evening visit just as Rebecca was finishing a phone call that sounded increasingly heated. When she hung up, she looked at all of us with something approaching satisfaction. "That was Linda's broker," she announced. "Apparently the social media situation has reached their office.
Multiple clients have called asking if it's true that one of their agents chose a house sale over her daughter's medical emergency. The broker wanted to understand exactly what happened. She paused, checking her notes. I provided a timeline. Labor started at 6:47 a.m. Sarah's message for help was sent at 7:15 a.m. Linda's response refusing assistance came at 7:22 a.m. The closing wasn't until 2 p.m., and according to the Hendersons, it could have been rescheduled to any day that week. Linda never mentioned a family emergency or asked to move the appointment. Tom was taking notes again. What was the broker's response? Concerned. Very concerned. Apparently, they've had previous complaints about Linda's lack of availability during client emergencies, and this confirms a pattern they've been worried about. They're conducting what they called a review of her professional practices and public representation of the company. David asked the question I was afraid to voice. What does that mean? Rebecca's smile was sharp. It means your mother's decision to publicly defend choosing money over her daughter's labor is having consequences she didn't anticipate, professional consequences. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang, Mom's name on the screen. I looked at David, who nodded, then answered on speaker. Sarah, you need to fix the situation immediately. Her voice was tight with panic. People are attacking my business, my broker is asking questions, and clients are canceling appointments. This has gone too far. I haven't done anything, Mom. You've allowed this situation to get out of control. You need to post something explaining that there was a misunderstanding, that I had important business obligations, that you understand why I couldn't just drop everything. I looked around the room at the people who had dropped everything. Rebecca, who'd cleared her schedule and was sleeping on a hospital room floor. Tom, who'd spent his evening researching legal implications. Jake, who'd stopped by multiple times despite working double shifts. Maria, who'd closed your bakery early to bring food and support. I'm not going to lie, Mom. It's not lying, it's clarifying. You're making me look like a monster for being dedicated to my career. No, Mom, you made yourself look like someone who chose a house sale over her daughter's labor, because that's exactly what you did. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then, you're being cruel, Sarah. I worked hard to build my business. I can't just abandon my responsibilities because you decided to have a baby. Because I decided to have a baby. As if Emma's birth was an inconvenience I'd chosen to inflict on Mom's schedule. Mom, do you understand that Emma is your granddaughter? Another pause. Of course I do, and I'm planning to visit when things calm down and I have time to properly meet her. When things calm down, when she has time to properly meet her granddaughter who was already 3 days old? Don't bother, I said, echoing the words I'd spoken the night before. Emma deserves family who think she's worth showing up for. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I blocked her on every social media platform I could think of. It felt like cutting away something that had been infected for years, something I'd been afraid to acknowledge was poisoning everything around it. Rebecca was watching me with approval. How do you feel? Free, I said, and meant it. For the first time in years, I felt free from waiting for Mom to become the mother I needed her to be. Free from making excuses for behavior that everyone else could see was unacceptable. Free from protecting her feelings at the expense of my own well-being. Tom closed his folder with a decisive snap. Sarah, your mother has created a comprehensive record of her own callousness. She's documented her choices, defended them publicly, and demonstrated a pattern of prioritizing money over family across multiple incidents. If you ever need legal protection from her behavior, you have more evidence than most people could gather in years. Jake leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. I still can't believe she chose a house sale over this. In all my years as a paramedic, I've never seen anything like it. And then to defend it publicly, that takes a special kind of selfish. As the evening wore on, our room filled with the kind of warmth I'd hoped for, but never expected to find in a hospital. Rebecca made calls to arrange her work schedule so she could help with Emma's first weeks. Tom researched pediatricians and insurance requirements. Jake shared stories from his own children's births, making David laugh about the chaos we had to look forward to. This was family. Not the people who shared my DNA, but the people who chose to show up when showing up mattered. The people who rearranged their lives to support mine during the most important transition I'd ever faced. Emma slept peacefully through it all, unaware that her first days had been marked by both abandonment and overwhelming love. She'd never know that her grandmother chose money over meeting her. But she grew up knowing that real family means people who choose you every day, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. The morning after I blocked Mom's number brought an unexpected visitor to our hospital room. Dr. Hayes arrived during her usual rounds, but instead of her typical quick check-in, she lingered, studying Emma's chart with unusual intensity. When she finally looked up, her expression was troubled. "Sarah, I need to discuss something with you. It's about the documentation in Emma's birth record." She pulled up a chair, settling in with the deliberate manner of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. "Hospital policy requires us to note the support system present during delivery, particularly for first-time mothers. Your case has raised some questions in our department." David shifted uncomfortably. "Questions about what?" Dr. Hayes consulted her tablet, then looked directly at me. "In my 15 years practicing obstetrics, I've delivered over 4,000 babies. I've seen every possible family configuration you can imagine. Estranged relatives who reconcile in the delivery room, divorced parents who put aside decades of animosity to support their daughter,
Military families separated by deployment who move heaven and earth to be present via video call. What I documented in your case is unprecedented in my professional experience." She tapped her screen, bringing up what appeared to be official medical notes. "A mother who was contacted during active labor, informed of the medical situation, and who explicitly refused to provide assistance or emotional support, who then publicly documented prioritizing a business transaction during her daughter's delivery. This isn't just unusual family dynamics, Sarah. This is a level of abandonment during medical vulnerability that my colleagues and I have never encountered." The weight of her words settled over the room. This wasn't just hurt feelings or family drama. This was a medical professional telling us that Mom's behavior was so far outside normal human response that it warranted special documentation. "What does that mean for us?" I asked quietly. "It means that if you ever need professional testimony about the emotional trauma of this situation, you have it. Medical professionals are trained to recognize support system failures that impact patient well-being. What happened to you wasn't just personally hurtful. It was medically significant." Dr. Hayes paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've also been asked to consult on a research study about family support during childbirth. Your case may help other medical professionals recognize and address similar situations." Rebecca, who had been quietly checking emails on her phone, looked up sharply. "A research study?" Arizona State University's psychology department is conducting research on family trauma and major life events. They're particularly interested in documented cases where family members deliberately choose financial gain over supporting relatives during medical emergencies. Your mother's social media documentation of her decision-making process could be valuable data for understanding this type of behavior. Tom leaned forward with his lawyer expression. "What would that involve?" "Anonymous case study inclusion, most likely. The researchers are interested in patterns of behavior, documented decision-making processes, and long-term psychological impact on the abandoned family members. Sarah would have complete control over what information, if any, she chose to share." I looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her hospital bassinet, unaware that her grandmother's cruelty was so unusual it might contribute to psychological research. "I need to think about it." "Of course, but Sarah, I want you to understand something important. What your mother did to you wasn't normal. It wasn't acceptable, and it wasn't your fault. Sometimes it takes professional perspective to fully grasp just how far outside normal behavior something really is." Jake arrived shortly after Dr. Hayes left, carrying coffee and wearing an expression I'd learned to recognize as his professional crisis mode face. He'd clearly been thinking about something during his drive to the hospital. "Sarah, I need to tell you about a conversation I had with my supervisor yesterday." He settled into the visitor's chair, his demeanor more serious than usual. "I mentioned your situation during our shift briefing, and Captain Rodriguez asked me to document it formally." David frowned. "Document it how?" "As an unusual case study for our crisis intervention training. See, paramedics are trained to expect certain family response patterns during medical emergencies. When we transport someone in labor, we automatically plan for family members converging on the hospital. We expect frantic relatives, people driving dangerously fast to get there, grandparents canceling everything to be present for births." Jake pulled out his phone, scrolling to what looked like an official report.
What your mother did is so far outside our expected response patterns that Captain Rodriguez wants to use it as a training example of psychological abandonment during medical crisis. Not with names, obviously, but as a case study in recognizing when family behavior crosses from complicated into actually harmful. The idea that mom's behavior was so abnormal it warranted emergency services training was both validating and devastating. I'd spent years making excuses for her self-centeredness, convincing myself that her priorities were just different, that she showed love in other ways. But having multiple medical professionals independently identify her behavior as clinically significant abandonment was impossible to rationalize away. "There's something else," Jake continued, his voice gentle but firm. "Captain Rodriguez asked me to tell you that if you ever need official documentation of family neglect during a medical emergency, our department has protocols for that. It's not common, but it exists for cases involving vulnerable adults who are abandoned by their designated support systems during health crises." Rebecca looked up from her laptop, where she'd been typing steadily. "Jake, what would that documentation be used for?" "Legal protection mostly. If someone's family has a pattern of abandoning them during emergencies, there are legal frameworks for ensuring they can't make medical decisions or access personal information during future crises. It's about protecting vulnerable people from those who've proven they'll prioritize their own interests over the person's well-being during critical moments." Tom was taking notes again, his legal mind clearly processing the implications. "That's significant, Sarah. If your mother has established a pattern of abandoning you during emergencies, there are legal protections available to ensure she can't interfere with your medical decisions in the future." The conversation was interrupted by Rebecca's phone ringing. She glanced at the screen, then at me. "It's Channel 12 News. Should I answer?" My stomach dropped. "News? Why would news be calling you?" Rebecca answered the call, stepping into the hallway for privacy. Through the glass door, I could see her gesturing emphatically, her expression growing more animated as the conversation continued. When she returned, her face was a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "That was Jennifer Martinez from Channel 12's Consumer Protection segment. Apparently, someone forwarded them the screenshots of your mother's social media posts, along with the timeline of events. They're interested in doing a story about business professionals who prioritize financial gain over family medical emergencies." David looked alarmed. "They want to put this on the news?" "They want to investigate whether there's a pattern of this type of behavior among certain professionals. Your mother's case is particularly interesting to them because she documented her decision-making process so thoroughly. They have her posts showing the house sale was prioritized, the celebration dinner afterward, and her subsequent defense of choosing business
Over her daughter's labor. Rebecca consulted her notes from the phone call. But here's the really interesting part. They've received tips about 3 other real estate professionals in the Phoenix area who have similar stories of abandoning family members during medical emergencies for business reasons. Apparently, your mother's situation isn't completely isolated. Tom looked up from his legal pad. That suggests a broader cultural problem within certain business communities. People who've become so focused on financial success that they've lost perspective on basic human obligations. The reporter wants to interview people who've been affected by this type of family abandonment during medical crises. She says they've been getting calls since yesterday from viewers who saw your mother's social media posts being shared and recognized similar patterns in their own families. The idea that mom's behavior might be part of a larger social problem was both comforting and horrifying. Comforting because it meant I wasn't alone in experiencing this type of abandonment. Horrifying because it meant other people had been hurt this way too. Jake shifted in his chair, clearly debating whether to share something. Finally, he spoke up. "Sarah, I've been thinking about this situation a lot. In my job, I see people during their most vulnerable moments. Medical emergencies strip away all the social niceties and reveal who people really are underneath." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I keep coming back to is this. Your mother didn't just fail to show up. She actively chose something else. She looked at a situation where her daughter was scared and in medical distress, and she calculated that a house commission was more valuable than providing comfort during what she knew was a life-changing moment." David nodded grimly. "And then she documented that choice publicly, like she was proud of it." "Exactly.
That's not just selfishness or poor judgment. That's a fundamental lack of empathy that goes beyond normal human response patterns. People like that don't change, Sarah. They just get better at hiding their true nature until crisis moments reveal who they really are. Rebecca's laptop chimed with another email notification. She read it quickly, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. This is from HR at your mother's real estate company. They want to schedule a meeting with you. With me? Why? They've received multiple complaints from clients and colleagues about Linda's social media posts and her documented prioritization of business over family medical emergencies. Apparently, it's affecting their company's reputation, and they want to understand the full scope of the situation before making decisions about her continued employment. Tom sat up straighter. They're considering terminating her? They're conducting what they call a comprehensive review of her professional conduct and public representation of company values, which, in corporate speak, usually means they're building a case for dismissal but want to ensure they have complete documentation first. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mom had spent years building her career at the expense of family relationships, and now her treatment of family was threatening to destroy that same career. She documented her own cruelty so thoroughly that it was becoming a liability for her employer. What would they want from me? I asked. Rebecca consulted the email. A timeline of events, copies of the text messages from when you asked for help, and your perspective on whether this represents a pattern of behavior or an isolated incident. They're particularly interested in understanding whether she's displayed similar prioritization of business over family emergencies in the past. I thought about all the missed family events, the holidays cut short for urgent client calls, the times she'd promised to help with something important only to cancel last minute for work reasons. It's definitely a pattern. They also want to know if you'd be willing to provide a written statement about the impact of her behavior on your family relationships and whether you consider her social media posts about the situation to be representative of company values. Tom was writing furiously. Sarah, this is important. If her company terminates her based on this situation, it establishes legal precedent that this type of family abandonment during medical emergencies can have professional consequences. That could be significant for other people dealing with similar situations. Jake nodded approvingly. Good. People who choose money over their family's medical emergencies shouldn't be representing companies that serve families. There should be consequences for that level of callousness. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a message from someone named Patricia Henderson. Sarah, this is Patricia Henderson. The client your mother prioritized over your labor? I saw the social media posts and I'm horrified. If I had known you were giving birth, I would have insisted on rescheduling immediately. No house sale is worth what she put you through. I'm so sorry. I showed the message to everyone in the room. Rebecca whistled low. Even her client is appalled by what she did? That's significant. Another text came through, this time from someone named Carol Mitchell. Hi, Sarah. This is your mom's neighbor. I saw what happened on social media, and I wanted you to know that everyone in the neighborhood is talking about it. We're all shocked by her behavior. No one can understand how she could choose a house sale over her daughter's labor. I'm a grandmother myself, and I would have driven through a blizzard to be there for my daughter's delivery. Then another from someone identifying themselves as a colleague from Mom's real estate office. Sarah, I work with your mother, and I wanted to apologize for her behavior. Those of us who are parents ourselves are appalled by what she did. We're all questioning whether we really knew her at all. The messages kept coming throughout the afternoon. Neighbors, colleagues, even complete strangers who'd seen his social media posts being shared, all expressing shock, support, and disbelief that a mother could make such a choice. Each message reinforced what the medical professionals had told us. This wasn't normal behavior, and people recognized it as fundamentally wrong. Rebecca was documenting everything, creating what she called a comprehensive record of community response. She explained that if this situation ever required legal intervention, having evidence of how abnormal Mom's behavior appeared to objective observers would be valuable. Around 4 p.m., my phone rang with a call from a number I recognized as Mom's real estate office. I answered cautiously, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear. Sarah Martinez? This is Diana Foster, HR Director at Premier Properties.
I'm calling regarding the situation involving your mother, Linda Thompson. We've received numerous complaints about her recent social media posts and her documented behavior during your medical emergency. Diana's voice was professional but strained. We need to understand the full scope of what occurred, as it appears to conflict significantly with our company values regarding family support and community responsibility. Would you be willing to schedule a meeting to discuss the timeline of events? I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd shown up for me when my own mother wouldn't. Yes, I think that would be appropriate. Excellent. We're conducting a thorough review of this situation as it has implications for our company's reputation and values. Between you and me, Sarah, in 20 years of human resources work, I've never encountered a situation where an employee's treatment of their own family during a medical emergency raised such significant professional concerns. After I hung up, Tom leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. Your mother created this entire situation through her own documented choices. She's about to learn that actions have consequences, especially when you're proud enough of those actions to post them publicly. Jake checked his watch and stood to leave for his evening shift. Sarah, I want you to remember something. What your mother did to you was so far outside normal human behavior that multiple professionals are using it as an example of what not to do. That's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix. Some people reveal who they really are during crisis moments, and what your mother revealed is that she values money more than family. As the evening wore on, Emma woke for her feeding, and I settled into the hospital chair to nurse her. David dimmed the lights, and Rebecca worked quietly on her laptop, occasionally showing me supportive messages that continued to pour in from the community. Holding Emma in the soft hospital room lighting, surrounded by people who'd chosen to support us during this vulnerable time, I felt something I'd never expected to feel about Mom's abandonment. Relief. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to make excuses for her behavior or pretend it was normal. The world could see exactly who she was, and I was free to build the family I actually wanted for my daughter. A family that showed up. A family that prioritized love over money. A family that understood that some moments in life are sacred, and you don't abandon people during their most vulnerable times for any amount of financial gain. Emma finished nursing and fell asleep against my chest, tiny and perfect, and surrounded by people who would move mountains for her. She'd never know the pain of waiting for someone who should love her to choose her over money, because I'd make sure she was only surrounded by people who understood what love actually looked like. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Rebecca arrived early, carrying coffee and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. She'd received a call from Channel 12 News that she'd been waiting to share with me. Sarah, the story is bigger than we thought. The reporter, Jennifer Martinez, has been investigating since yesterday. She's found documentation of similar cases involving 4 other business professionals in the Phoenix area who have abandoned family members during medical emergencies for work reasons. Your mother's case is the most extensively documented, but it's part of a pattern. She pulled out her phone, showing me a news article draft that Jennifer had sent her for fact-checking. The headline read, "Phoenix business professionals prioritize profits over family medical emergencies. Investigation reveals disturbing trend." They're running the story tonight. Your mother's situation is featured prominently because she documented everything herself, but they're treating it as part of a larger investigation into what they're calling extreme business prioritization at the expense of basic human decency. David read over my shoulder, shaking his head. She's going to be on the news for choosing a house sale over Sarah's labor. Not just local news, Rebecca continued. Jennifer says the story has been picked up by news outlets in 3 other states. Apparently, this type of documented family abandonment during medical emergencies is rare enough that it's drawing national attention. Tom arrived shortly after, carrying a thick folder and wearing his most serious lawyer expression. Sarah, I have updates from 3 different sources, and they're all significant. He opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be official documents.
First, your mother's real estate company has decided to terminate her employment. The HR director called this morning to inform me that they've received over 30 complaints from clients and colleagues about her social media posts and documented behavior. They consider her public defense of abandoning her daughter during labor to be incompatible with their company values. I felt a moment of shock, followed immediately by a sense of justice. Mom had built her entire identity around her real estate success, had sacrificed family relationships for career advancement, and now that same career was ending because of how she'd treated family. Second, Tom continued, 3 of her former clients have filed formal complaints with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, citing her documented pattern of prioritizing personal convenience over professional obligations. The social media posts about choosing the Henderson closing over your labor were the final evidence they needed to demonstrate unprofessional conduct. He flipped to another document. And third, Patricia Henderson has contacted their attorney. Apparently, she's considering legal action against your mother for what she calls fraudulent concealment of personal conflicts that affected professional service. Rebecca was taking notes rapidly. So, Mom's losing her job, facing professional sanctions, and potentially being sued by the very client she chose over Sarah's labor. The irony is poetic. She sacrificed her relationship with her daughter and granddaughter for a commission that's now going to cost her everything she thought she was protecting. My phone buzzed with yet another unknown number. This time, it was a voicemail from someone identifying themselves as a producer from a national morning show. They'd seen the local news coverage and wanted to interview me about family abandonment during medical emergencies. "This is getting bigger than just Phoenix," I said, playing the voicemail for everyone to hear. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother documented her behavior so thoroughly
that it's become a case study in how not to treat family during crisis moments. She created the evidence of her own cruelty, and now it's being used to help other people recognize and address similar situations." Jake arrived for his lunch break visit, bringing sandwiches and news from his firehouse. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this, but Captain Rodriguez got a call from the state EMS training director. They want to include your situation in the statewide curriculum for emergency responders. Apparently, recognizing family abandonment during medical crises is something they want all paramedics and EMTs to be trained to identify and document." The scope of impact was overwhelming. Mom's choice to prioritize money over my labor wasn't just affecting our family anymore. It was becoming a teaching tool, a cautionary tale, a documented example of behavior so far outside normal human response that multiple institutions wanted to study it. "In a weird way," Jake continued, "your mother's cruelty is going to help other people. Every paramedic who gets trained on this case study will be better equipped to recognize when someone's family is failing them during a medical emergency. Every news viewer who sees this story might reconsider their own priorities during family crises." Dr. Hayes stopped by during her afternoon rounds, her expression more serious than usual. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that Emma's birth record has been flagged for inclusion in a medical study about family support systems during childbirth. Not with identifying information, of course, but your case is significant enough that researchers want to study it." She sat down, consulting her tablet. The study is specifically looking at cases where family members make documented choices to prioritize financial gain over supporting relatives during medical vulnerabilities. Your mother's social media posts provide unprecedented documentation of the decision-making process behind this type of abandonment. David asked what we were all wondering. Is this type of behavior really that unusual? In 15 years of obstetrics practice, I've never seen anything comparable. I've had patients whose mothers couldn't be present due to geography, illness, or genuine emergencies. I've never had a patient whose mother was contacted during labor, understood the situation, and chose a business appointment instead. The fact that she then defended this choice publicly makes it even more unusual from a psychological standpoint. Dr. Hayes flipped through her notes. The researchers are particularly interested in the long-term psychological impact on children who grow up knowing that their birth was considered less important than a business transaction by a family member. There's very little data on that type of documented rejection during such a significant life event. The thought of Emma someday understanding that her grandmother chose money over witnessing her birth was heartbreaking. But I was also determined that Emma would grow up surrounded by people who understood her worth, people who would never make her compete with financial gain for their love and attention. That evening, Channel 12 aired their investigation. Rebecca, David, and I watched from the hospital room as Jennifer Martinez reported on what she called a disturbing trend of business professionals prioritizing financial gain over family medical emergencies in the Phoenix area. Mom's social media posts were featured prominently, along with a timeline of events from my labor. The story included interviews with medical professionals about the psychological impact of family abandonment during vulnerable moments, expert commentary about normal family response patterns during medical emergencies, and reactions from community members who expressed shock at the documented behavior. But what made the story particularly powerful was the interview with Patricia Henderson, the client Mom had prioritized over my labor. She appeared on camera, visibly upset, explaining that she had no idea her real estate agent was choosing their appointment over her daughter's delivery. If I had known that Linda was abandoning her daughter during labor to meet with us, I would have been horrified, Patricia said, her voice shaking with emotion. No house sale is worth what she put her family through. As a mother myself, I cannot imagine making that choice. The story ended with Jennifer Martinez providing resources for people dealing with family abandonment during medical crises and announcing that the investigation would continue as more cases came to light. Within an hour of the broadcast, my phone was buzzing with messages from people across the country who'd seen the story shared on social media. Mothers, daughters, grandmothers, all expressing support and sharing their own stories of family members who'd let them down during important moments. But the message that meant the most came from someone unexpected. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the OBGYN from the University Research Study. She'd seen the news coverage and wanted me to know that my willingness to share my story was already helping other women recognize that family abandonment during medical emergencies isn't normal or acceptable. Your mother's documented behavior is serving as a teaching tool. Every medical professional who learns about this case study will be better equipped to support patients whose family failed them during vulnerable moments. Your experience is painful, but it's helping to protect other women from similar abandonment. As I turned off my phone and settled Emma for her nighttime feeding, I realized that Mom's cruelty had inadvertently created something positive. Her documented prioritization of money over family had become so publicly unacceptable that it was changing how institutions thought about family support during medical emergencies. She'd meant to hurt me by choosing a house sale over my labor. Instead, she'd revealed herself so completely that the world could see exactly who she was, and that revelation was protecting other families from similar abandonment. Emma fell asleep in my arms, surrounded by people who loved her enough to rearrange their lives for her well-being. She'd never have to wonder if she was worth more than money to the people who mattered, because I'd make sure she was only surrounded by people who already knew the answer to that question. Outside our hospital room, the Phoenix lights twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere in that city, a woman who chose a commission over her daughter's labor was learning that some choices have consequences that extend far beyond what you originally intended. But in room 314, a new family was growing stronger, built on the foundation of people who understood that love means showing up, especially when showing up is inconvenient. That was the lesson I wanted Emma to
Learn. That was the family I wanted her to know. And thanks to her grandmother's documented cruelty, that was exactly the family she was going to have. 6 months later, Emma gurgled happily in her high chair while I prepared her first solid food in our new kitchen. We'd moved from the apartment at Sunridge Commons to a small house with a yard, partly because we needed more space, but mostly because I wanted Emma to grow up somewhere that had never been touched by Mom's presence. David was working from the home office we'd set up in the spare bedroom, and through the window, I could see Rebecca's car pulling into our driveway for our weekly dinner tradition. The transformation in our lives had been gradual, but profound. What started as crisis management in a hospital room had evolved into the most supportive community I'd ever experienced. Rebecca and Tom had become Emma's chosen grandparents, showing up for every milestone with the enthusiasm Mom never demonstrated. Jake and his wife Maria brought their kids over for barbecues, creating the extended family atmosphere I'd always wanted. Even Dr. Hayes occasionally stopped by during her off hours, having developed a genuine friendship that extended far beyond her professional obligations. But the most significant change was internal. I no longer waited for my phone to ring with an apology that would never come. I no longer made excuses for behavior that everyone else could see was unacceptable. I no longer carried the weight of trying to maintain a relationship with someone who'd proven that money mattered more to her than my most vulnerable moments. The final legal documents had arrived 3 weeks ago. Mom's real estate license had been suspended pending a full investigation by the Arizona Department of Real Estate. The complaints from former clients, combined with her documented pattern of prioritizing financial gain over professional obligations, had created an unprecedented case study in professional misconduct. She'd appealed the decision, of course, but her own social media posts provided such clear evidence of her priorities that the appeal was denied within days. Patricia Henderson had indeed filed a lawsuit, claiming that Mom's concealment of the family emergency had constituted fraudulent representation. The case was scheduled for mediation next month, but Patricia's attorney had indicated they were confident of success given the extensive documentation Mom had provided of her own deceptive behavior. The media attention had eventually died down, but not before the story had been featured in several national publications and academic journals. The case had become a reference point for discussions about work-life balance, family obligations, and the psychological impact of documented rejection during significant life events. Mom had wanted to be famous for her real estate success. Instead, she'd become infamous as an example of what happens when business priorities completely override basic human decency. Rebecca knocked on the door before letting herself in, carrying a casserole dish and wearing the satisfied expression she got when she had particularly good news to share. She'd been following the aftermath of Mom's situation with the focused attention she brought to all her projects, documenting developments and ensuring that the broader implications weren't lost. "Sarah, you're going to want to sit down for this," she said, setting the casserole on the counter and pulling out her phone. "I just got off a call with Jennifer Martinez from Channel 12. Remember the follow-up story they've been working on about family abandonment during medical emergencies?" I transferred Emma to her bouncy seat, settling in to hear whatever update Rebecca had discovered. Over the past 6 months, she'd become my unofficial information coordinator, tracking developments I was often too emotionally exhausted to follow myself. They've identified 12 additional cases in Arizona alone of family members prioritizing business obligations over relatives' medical emergencies. Your mother's case was so well documented that it became the template for recognizing similar patterns in other families. David emerged from his office, drawn by our conversation. 12 other cases? All involving business professionals who made documented choices to prioritize financial gain over family members during health crises. The difference is that most of the other cases involved private family dynamics. Your mother was unique in documenting her decision-making process so publicly and then defending it afterward. Rebecca scrolled through her phone, pulling up what appeared to be news articles and social media posts. But here's the really significant part. The story has prompted legislation in 3 states requiring healthcare facilities to provide additional support resources for patients whose families abandon them during medical emergencies. Your experience is literally changing policy. The idea that my pain had contributed to systemic change was both comforting and surreal. Mom's documented cruelty during Emma's birth hadn't just revealed her true character, it had become a catalyst for protecting other people from similar abandonment. "There's more," Rebecca continued, her expression growing more serious. "Jennifer found out that your mother has been struggling significantly since losing her real estate license. She's filed for bankruptcy, lost her house in Scottsdale Hills, and according to public records, she's currently living in a studio apartment in Tempe. The information should have made me feel vindicated, but instead I felt oddly empty. Not sad for her exactly, but not satisfied by her downfall either. She'd built her entire identity around financial success and professional recognition.
And losing both had apparently left her with nothing substantial to fall back on. "Has she tried to contact you?" David asked, settling Emma on his lap while she reached for his coffee cup. "No direct contact, but Rebecca's been monitoring her social media activity, and it's illuminating." Rebecca pulled up screenshots on her phone, showing me Mom's personal Facebook account over the past few months. The contrast with her previous real estate success posts was stark. Where she'd once shared photos of luxury homes and closing celebrations, she now posted vague, inspirational quotes about overcoming challenges and rising above negativity. But the subtext revealed her true state of mind. Posts about ungrateful children who don't understand sacrifice. Articles about successful women being punished for prioritizing career advancement. Shares of content about family members who turn against you when you need them most. She's still playing the victim, I observed, scrolling through the posts. Even after everything that's happened, she can't acknowledge
Her choices caused these consequences. That's what makes her case so valuable for psychological research, Rebecca explained. Dr. Patricia Hayes contacted me last week. The study your case contributed to has been published in the Journal of Family Psychology, and it's getting significant attention in academic circles. She pulled up the abstract on her phone, reading portions aloud. The study identifies what they're calling extreme business prioritization disorder, a pattern of behavior where individuals consistently prioritize financial gain over family obligations during crisis situations, then demonstrate inability to recognize the inappropriateness of their choices. David looked up from playing with Emma. "So there's actually a name for what Sarah's mom did?" The researchers created a diagnostic framework based on documented cases like yours. Your mother's social media posts provided some of the clearest examples they'd ever seen of someone defending the prioritization of money over family medical emergencies while seeming genuinely unable to understand why others found the behavior problematic. The academic recognition of Mom's behavior patterns was validating in a way I hadn't expected. For years, I'd questioned whether my hurt feelings about her priorities were justified, whether I was being too sensitive about her focus on career success. Having researchers identify her behavior as a recognized psychological disorder confirmed that my instincts about the inappropriateness of her choices had been accurate. Tom arrived shortly after, carrying legal documents and wearing his most professional expression. As Rebecca's husband and our unofficial family lawyer, he'd been tracking the legal developments related to Mom's situation with the thoroughness he brought to all his cases. "Sarah, I have final updates on all the legal proceedings related to your mother's conduct," he said, spreading papers across our kitchen table. "The outcomes are more comprehensive than we initially anticipated." He organized the documents into neat piles, his lawyer training evident in his systematic approach. First, the Arizona Department of Real Estate has issued their final ruling. Your mother's license has been permanently revoked. The board cited her documented pattern of prioritizing personal financial gain over professional obligations, with your labor situation serving as the most egregious example. Emma babbled happily from David's lap, oblivious to the serious adult conversation happening around her. In 6 months, she'd grown from the tiny newborn who'd entered the world during such traumatic circumstances into a vibrant, smiling baby who knew nothing but love and security. Second, Tom continued, Patricia Henderson's lawsuit was resolved through mediation. Your mother was required to pay substantial damages for what the mediator determined was fraudulent concealment of conflicts that affected professional service. The mediator's report specifically noted that concealing a family medical emergency to avoid rescheduling a business appointment constituted deceptive professional conduct. David shifted Emma to his other knee, his expression thoughtful. So, she had to pay the very client she chose over Sarah's labor? Correct. And the mediator's findings have been reported to other professional licensing boards. Your mother will be unable to obtain real estate licenses in Nevada, California, or New Mexico due to the Arizona ruling. Tom flipped to another document, his expression growing more serious. But the most significant development is that the FBI's white-collar crime division has opened an investigation into your mother's business practices over the past 5 years. Rebecca looked up sharply. FBI? For what? The pattern of documented deception revealed by your case prompted former clients to come forward with additional allegations. Apparently, your mother's willingness to conceal family emergencies to avoid rescheduling business appointments
was part of a broader pattern of misrepresenting her availability and priorities to clients. Tom consulted his notes, reading from what appeared to be an official summary. 7 former clients have provided evidence that she misrepresented her schedule, her priorities, and her professional availability in ways that affected their real estate transactions. The FBI is investigating whether this constitutes wire fraud, given that she used electronic communications to deliberately deceive clients about her professional capacity. The scope of consequences flowing from Mom's documented behavior during Emma's birth was staggering. What had started as personal cruelty toward her daughter had revealed a pattern of professional deception that was now under federal investigation. "How does this affect us?" I asked, reaching for Emma as she started to fuss. "Minimally," Tom assured me. "You might be called a witness to establish the pattern of behavior, but your role would be limited to providing testimony about her documented choices during your medical emergency. The FBI is more interested in the financial fraud aspects than the family abandonment elements." Jake arrived for dinner shortly after Tom finished his legal briefing, bringing his wife and kids and carrying news from his own professional circles. As one of Phoenix's most experienced paramedics, he'd been following the emergency services training developments that had grown out of my situation. "Sarah, you'll want to hear this," he said after we'd gotten everyone settled around our extended kitchen table. "The state EMS training curriculum that includes your case study has been adopted by 4 other states. Paramedics across the western United States are now trained to recognize and document family abandonment during medical emergencies." His wife Maria looked up from helping her youngest daughter with her dinner. "What does that training involve?" "Recognizing signs that a patient's family support system has failed during a medical crisis, documenting those failures appropriately, and connecting patients with alternative support resources. Your mom's behavior was so far outside normal family response patterns that it became the perfect teaching example of what abandonment looks like." Emma reached for David's water glass, and he redirected her attention to her toy keys. At 6 months old, she was already showing signs of the determination that hopefully would serve her well as she grew up surrounded by people who understood her worth. "The really significant part," Jake continued, "is that this training is helping other people. Last month, the paramedic in Colorado recognized that an elderly man's family was abandoning him during a cardiac emergency because they were more concerned about missing work than supporting him. Because of the training based on your case, the paramedic was able to document the abandonment and connect the patient with alternative support resources."
With social services for ongoing support. Rebecca was taking notes on her phone, documenting the expanding impact of what had started as Mom's personal cruelty toward our family. So, Sarah's experience is literally preventing other people from being abandoned during medical emergencies? Exactly. The training helps emergency responders recognize when families are failing their relatives during crisis moments and provides tools for addressing those failures. Your mom's documented behavior has become the template for identifying this type of abandonment. Dr. Hayes arrived fashionably late, bringing dessert and apologies for her delayed flight from a medical conference in Denver. As Emma's honorary grandmother and my friend, she'd become a regular part of our dinner gatherings. But tonight, she had professional news to share. "Sarah, I presented the findings from the childbirth support study at the conference, and the response was unprecedented," she said, settling in with a plate Rebecca prepared for her. "Medical professionals from around the country approached me afterward to share similar cases they'd encountered." She pulled out her conference notes, consulting them as she spoke. "The study results have prompted changes in hospital protocols for supporting patients whose families abandoned them during labor and delivery. 15 hospitals across the country have implemented new policies for providing additional emotional support when families prioritize other obligations over being present for births." David looked up from feeding Emma small pieces of soft fruit. "So other women won't have to go through what Sarah experienced?" "The goal is prevention and better support," Dr. Hayes explained. "When family members make documented choices to prioritize business or financial gain over supporting relatives during childbirth, hospitals now have protocols for providing alternative emotional support and documenting the abandonment for potential future reference." Emma clapped her hands excitedly, covered in fruit puree and completely oblivious to the serious conversation happening around her.
She'd grown up surrounded by people who'd rearranged their lives to support her family, and that foundation of reliable love was evident in her confident, happy demeanor. But the most significant development, Dr. Hayes continued, is that the study has prompted research into intergenerational trauma patterns. Researchers want to understand how documented rejection during significant life events affects children as they grow up, and how to prevent those children from repeating similar patterns with their own families. The idea that Emma might someday benefit from research prompted by her grandmother's cruelty was both ironic and hopeful. Mom's documented prioritization of money over family might ultimately help Emma build healthier relationships by providing scientific understanding of what unhealthy prioritization looked like. As the evening wound down and our chosen family began cleaning up from dinner, I reflected on how completely our lives had transformed since that morning 6 months ago when I'd texted Mom asking for help during labor. Her refusal to support me during Emma's birth had felt like the end of something important, but it had actually been the beginning of something much better. The family we'd built around Emma wasn't constrained by biological obligation or social expectation. It was composed of people who'd chosen to show up during difficult moments, who'd prioritized our well-being over their own convenience, who'd demonstrated through their actions that love meant being present when presence mattered most. Rebecca and Tom had become the grandparents Emma deserved, celebrating every milestone with genuine enthusiasm and providing the kind of reliable support Mom had never offered. Jake and Maria's children treated Emma like a beloved cousin, creating the extended family atmosphere I'd always wanted. Dr. Hayes brought the wisdom of medical experience combined with genuine affection, offering guidance grounded in both professional knowledge and personal care. Most importantly, Emma was growing up seeing what healthy family relationships looked like. She'd never have to wonder whether she was worth more than money to the people who claimed to love her, because everyone in her life had already proven that she was invaluable through their choices and actions. Late that night, after everyone had gone home and Emma was sleeping peacefully in her crib, I found myself looking through old photos on my phone. Pictures of Mom and me from years past, back when I'd still believed that her love was just expressed differently, that her priorities would shift when it really mattered. But mixed in with those old photos were new ones from the past 6 months. Rebecca holding Emma for the first time in the hospital, Tom teaching Emma to clap during one of our dinners, Jake's kids reading board books to Emma during a barbecue, Dr. Hayes laughing as Emma grabbed her stethoscope during a social visit. The contrast was striking. In the old photos with Mom, I looked like I was trying too hard, smiling too brightly, working to create warmth that wasn't naturally present. In the recent photos with our chosen family, the joy was effortless, genuine, unforced. Emma had been born into a family that knew her worth without question, that had proven their love through actions rather than words, that had chosen to prioritize her well-being over their own convenience repeatedly. She'd grow up secure in the knowledge that the people who mattered would show up when showing up was important. David found me in the nursery, standing beside Emma's crib and watching her sleep. "Thinking about everything that's happened?" he asked quietly, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Thinking about everything that's going to happen," I corrected. "Emma's going to grow up knowing what real family looks like. She'll never have to question whether she's worth someone's time and attention during important moments." We stood together in the soft nursery lighting, watching our daughter sleep peacefully, surrounded by evidence of love that had been earned rather than assumed. The room was filled with gifts from people who'd chosen to celebrate Emma's existence, photos from people who'd shown up to support our family, reminders of a community that had formed around the principle that some things were more important than money. My phone buzzed with a late-night text from an unknown number. For a moment, I wondered if Mom had finally found a way to contact me, but when I opened the message, it was from someone named Christina Walsh in Oregon. "Hi, Sarah. I saw your story in a psychology article about family abandonment during medical emergencies. My mother did something similar when my son was born, chose a business conference over being present for birth.
Her grandson's birth. Your case study helped me understand that I wasn't overreacting to feel hurt by her priorities. Thank you for sharing your experience.
it's helping other people recognize that this behavior isn't normal or acceptable. Messages like Christina's had been arriving regularly for months. People who'd experienced similar abandonment by family members who prioritized financial gain over emotional support during vulnerable moments. People who'd been told they were being too sensitive or too demanding when they expected family to show up during medical emergencies. People who'd found validation in understanding that documented patterns of choosing money over family weren't normal expressions of different love languages, but actual psychological disorders worthy of professional study. Mom's cruelty during Emma's birth had inadvertently created a movement of people recognizing and addressing family abandonment during medical crises. Her documented behavior had become so clearly unacceptable that it was helping others identify similar patterns in their own families and seek appropriate support. As I turned off my phone and prepared for bed, I realized that the most profound consequence of Mom's choices wasn't the damage she'd intended to inflict, but the healing she'd accidentally facilitated. By documenting her prioritization of money over family so thoroughly, she'd created a template that was helping other people recognize and escape similar patterns of emotional neglect. Emma would grow up in a world slightly more aware of the importance of showing up for family during vulnerable moments, partly because her grandmother's failure to show up had been so well documented that it became a cautionary tale. She'd benefit from hospital protocols and emergency services training that existed because healthcare professionals had learned to recognize family abandonment through studying our case. But most importantly, she'd grow up surrounded by people who'd proven that love meant prioritizing her well-being over their own convenience, who'd demonstrated that family was built through choices rather than genetics, who'd shown that some moments in life were sacred enough to rearrange everything else around them. That was Mom's unintended legacy. Not the cruelty she'd meant to inflict, but the love she'd inadvertently helped us recognize was worth protecting. Emma's birth had been marked by abandonment, but her childhood would be defined by the chosen family that had formed in response to that abandonment. In the end, Mom had been right about one thing. Her choices during Emma's birth had been a wake-up call, just not the one she'd intended. Instead of teaching me to lower my expectations of family support, her documented cruelty had taught me to raise my standards for what love looked like in action. And Emma would grow up knowing that real love showed up, especially when showing up was inconvenient. 2 years after Emma's birth, I stood in the kitchen of our new house, watching through the window as she toddled around the backyard with the confident gait of a child who'd never doubted her place in the world. Rebecca was teaching her to pick tomatoes from our garden while Tom assembled a swing set with David's help, their laughter carrying through the open windows. It was Emma's second birthday, and the celebration was everything a child's birthday should be, full of people who genuinely delighted in her existence. The transformation in our lives had been so complete that sometimes I forgot there had ever been a time when I'd waited for phone calls that never came, made excuses for behavior everyone else could see was cruel, or wondered if my expectations of family support were unreasonable. Emma had grown up knowing only love that showed up consistently, support that didn't need to be earned through perfect behavior, and adults who rearranged their schedules around her needs without resentment. Jake and Maria arrived with their 3 children, carrying a homemade cake decorated with Emma's favorite cartoon characters. Their youngest, Sophia, was only 6 months older than Emma, and watching them play together always reminded me that family wasn't just about the adults who showed up, but about creating connections that would last throughout childhood and beyond. Emma would grow up with siblings who weren't related by blood, but were bonded by the intentional love of the adults who'd chosen to build this community together. Dr. Hayes arrived shortly after, bringing medical journals and a satisfaction that came from seeing her informal research subject thriving in an environment of consistent emotional security. Over the past 2 years, she documented Emma's development as part of a longitudinal study about children who experience family rejection during infancy but are raised in supportive chosen family environments. The preliminary results suggested that children like Emma, who experience documented abandonment by biological relatives but are immediately surrounded by consistent chosen family support, actually develop stronger attachment patterns than children raised in traditional but emotionally unreliable family structures. Emma's attachment security scores are off the charts, Dr. Hayes told me as we watched the children play. She's developing the kind of emotional resilience that comes from never having to question whether the adults in her life will be available when she needs them. Rebecca was documenting the birthday celebration with the same methodical attention she brought to everything important in our lives. Over the past 2 years, she'd become not just Emma's chosen grandmother, but also the family historian, creating photo albums and memory books that would help Emma understand her story when she was old enough to ask questions about why some families look different from others. I want her to know that love is a choice people make every day, not something you're owed because of genetics, but something you earn by showing up consistently. The birthday party was interrupted by a phone call from Tom's law office. He stepped away to take it, returning with an expression I'd learned to recognize as his significant legal development face. Over the past 2 years, he'd continued tracking the legal and professional consequences that had flowed from Mom's documented behavior during Emma's birth, partly out of professional interest and partly to ensure that the broader implications weren't lost. That was Jennifer Martinez from Channel 12. She wanted to update us on the congressional testimony that's scheduled for next month. David looked up from pushing Emma on her
Swing. Congressional testimony? The House Subcommittee on Family and Children's Services is holding hearings about family abandonment during medical emergencies. Your case, Sarah, along with the research it prompted, is being presented as evidence for why federal legislation is needed to protect vulnerable patients whose families prioritize financial gain over medical support. The idea that Emma's birth story had reached the level of congressional consideration was both humbling and surreal. What had started as personal pain had evolved into a policy discussion about protecting people during their most vulnerable moments from family members who'd proven they couldn't be trusted to prioritize appropriately. The really significant part, Tom continued, consulting his notes from the phone call, is that your mother's documented behavior has become the primary case study for what legislators are calling economic prioritization abandonment. Her social media posts during your labor are being used as evidence that some people will choose financial gain over family medical emergencies and that legal protections are needed for the people they abandon. Jake wiped birthday cake frosting from his daughter's hands, shaking his head in amazement. Sarah's mom chose a house sale over her daughter's labor, and now Congress is debating federal legislation because of it? That's some serious unintended consequences. Emma ran over to me, her face covered in chocolate cake and her eyes bright with the security that came from being surrounded by adults who'd proven their love through actions rather than words. At 2 years old, she was already showing signs of the confidence that developed when children never had to compete for adult attention or worry about whether their needs would be met consistently. "Mama, swing," she demanded, grabbing my hand and pulling me toward the backyard play equipment that Tom and David had just finished assembling. As I pushed her higher and higher, listening to her delighted squeals, I marveled at how completely different her childhood was from what I'd imagined when I first learned I was pregnant. I'd expected Emma to grow up with a doting grandmother who would spoil her with gifts and attention, teach her family recipes, and create the kind of multi-generational memories I'd treasured from my own childhood. Instead, she was growing up without any biological grandparents, but with a chosen family so devoted to her well-being that she was actually receiving more consistent love and support than many children with traditional family structures. Rebecca had taught Emma to plant seeds and water flowers, creating a garden tradition they shared every weekend. Tom read her bedtime stories with the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed children's literature, often falling asleep in the rocking chair beside her crib after particularly long books. Jake and Maria included her in family outings as naturally as if she were their biological niece, ensuring she experienced the chaos and joy of large family gatherings. But it was Dr. Hayes who'd provided something I hadn't expected, the medical perspective that helped me understand Emma's development in the context of family trauma and recovery. Her regular check-ins weren't just social visits, but informal assessments of how a child could thrive when biological family rejection was immediately replaced by chosen family consistency. Children who experience early family abandonment but are quickly surrounded by reliable alternative support often develop what we call resilient attachment, Dr. Hayes explained as we watched Emma navigate the playground equipment with the fearless determination of a child who never doubted that adult hands would catch her if she fell. She knows that love is consistent because the adults in her life have proven it through their actions every day for 2 years. As the birthday celebration continued into the evening, I found myself reflecting on all the ways Mom's abandonment during Emma's birth had accidentally created something better than what I'd originally hoped for.
Emma would grow up in a family culture where love was demonstrated through presence during difficult moments, where adult needs never overshadowed children's well-being, and where financial considerations were always secondary to human connection. Maria was helping Emma open her last birthday present when my phone buzzed with a notification from a social media platform I rarely used anymore. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something about the timing made me check the message. It was from someone named Dr. Susan Rodriguez, identifying herself as a family therapist in Seattle. Sarah, I wanted you to know that your case study has become required reading in our graduate family therapy program. Your mother's documented behavior during your daughter's birth is being used to teach future therapists how to recognize and address family systems where financial priorities consistently override emotional support obligations. Your experience is helping train the next generation of mental health professionals to better support people dealing with similar family abandonment. Messages like Dr. Rodriguez's had been arriving regularly for 2 years, each one confirming that Mom's documented cruelty during Emma's birth had accidentally created educational opportunities that were helping other families. Psychology programs, medical schools, social work training, emergency services academies, all were using our case study to teach professionals how to recognize and address family abandonment during vulnerable moments. Emma had finished opening her birthday presents and was now distributing hugs to all the adults who'd made her birthday special. Watching her move confidently from person to person, secure in the knowledge that everyone present was genuinely delighted by her existence, I felt a profound gratitude for the family we'd built from the wreckage of the family I'd been born into. Rebecca was organizing the gift wrap and torn packages with her characteristic efficiency when another phone call interrupted the evening festivities. This time it was for her, and based on her side of the conversation, it was related to the business she had been building around family support advocacy. That was the Phoenix Children's Hospital Board, she announced after hanging up. They want to discuss funding for a new program providing support for patients whose families abandon them during medical emergencies. They're calling it the Emma Martinez Family Advocacy Initiative. The room went quiet as the significance of her words settled over everyone. Emma, oblivious to the adult conversation, continued playing with her new toys, but the adults exchanged glances that conveyed the weight of what Rebecca had just announced. "They're naming a hospital program after Emma?" David asked, his voice reflecting the same awe I felt.
Mixture of pride and disbelief I was feeling. Not just naming it after her, Rebecca clarified, consulting her notes from the phone call. Funding it based on the research that grew out of your case. The program will provide emotional support, advocacy services, and alternative family connections for patients whose relatives prioritize other obligations over medical support needs. Tom leaned forward, his lawyer instincts engaged. What would this program actually do? Professional counselors, volunteer family advocates, and connection services for people who've been abandoned by their biological families during medical crises. The idea is to ensure that no patient has to face surgery, childbirth, or medical treatment alone because their family members have chosen to prioritize business or financial obligations. Jake nodded approvingly. So, other people won't have to go through what Sarah experienced when her mom chose a house sale over labor support? Exactly. And the program will be funded partly by donations, but also by a partnership with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. Apparently, professional licensing fees now include a contribution to medical family support services, based on research showing that some real estate professionals have patterns of prioritizing financial gain over family medical emergencies. The irony was perfect. Mom's choice to abandon me during Emma's birth for a real estate commission was now generating funding to support other people abandoned by family members during medical crises. Her documented cruelty during Emma's birth had accidentally created a revenue stream for preventing similar abandonment. Emma climbed into my lap, tired from her big day, but still glowing with the satisfaction of a child who'd been celebrated exactly as she deserved. As she settled against my chest, I thought about all the ways her birth story would eventually be part of her identity, but in ways that empowered rather than wounded her. She'd grew up knowing that her arrival in the world had prompted positive changes that protected other families. She'd understand that her biological grandmother's absence had created space for chosen family love that was more reliable than genetics often provided. She'd see that her birth had contributed to research, policy changes, and support programs that helped other children and families navigate similar challenges. Most importantly, she'd know that love wasn't something you inherited, but something you chose to create every day through actions that prioritized other people's well-being over your own convenience. Dr. Hayes gathered her things to leave, but before departing, she shared one final update about the research that had grown from Emma's case study. The longitudinal study about children raised in chosen families after biological family rejection has been approved for a 10-year extension. Emma's development will continue to contribute to our understanding of how children thrive when consistency replaces genetics as the foundation of family structure. Emma waved goodbye to Dr. Hayes from the window, then turned to me with the serious expression she wore when processing important information. "Mama, why Dr. Hayes always take notes about me?" It was the first time she'd directly asked about the adult conversations that happened around her, and I realized she was old enough to start understanding her story in age-appropriate terms. Dr. Hayes is learning about how families love each other, and our family helps her understand that love comes from choice, not just from being related. She considered this seriously, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. Like how Rebecca and Tom are grandparents because they choose to be grandparents? Exactly like that. As we cleaned up from the birthday party, I reflected on how completely my understanding of family had been transformed by Mom's abandonment during Emma's most vulnerable moment. What I'd initially experienced as devastating rejection had evolved into the foundation for building something stronger, more intentional, and more reliable than what I'd lost. Emma was growing up in a family culture where adults consistently prioritized children's needs, where love was demonstrated through presence during difficult moments, and where financial considerations never overshadowed human connection. She'd never have to wonder whether she was worth someone's time during important events, because everyone in her life had already proven their priorities through their choices. The evening ended with Emma falling asleep in David's arms, while Rebecca and Tom finished loading the dishwasher, and Jake and Maria corralled their own tired children. It was the kind of domestic scene I'd imagined when I first learned I was pregnant, but with people I'd never expected to be part of it. As everyone prepared to leave, I found myself standing in our living room, surrounded by the remnants of a perfect birthday celebration, holding my daughter who'd grown up knowing only love that showed up consistently. The family I'd built wasn't the one I'd planned, but it was infinitely better than what I'd hoped for. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this time from someone identifying themselves as a graduate student at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. "Sarah, I'm writing my thesis about family support systems during medical emergencies using your case as a primary example of how documented abandonment can lead to stronger, chosen family structures. Your willingness to share your experience is helping train future doctors to recognize and address family dysfunction during patient care. Thank you for turning your pain into protection for others." Emma stirred in my arms as I read the message, her face peaceful with the deep sleep of a child who'd never questioned her safety or worth. Tomorrow, she'd wake up in a house filled with evidence of love from people who'd chosen to prioritize her well-being over their own convenience, surrounded by reminders that family was built through daily decisions rather than genetic accident. 2 years after her birth was marked by abandonment, Emma was thriving in abundance. Not material abundance, though our chosen family was generous with gifts and attention, but emotional abundance that came from never having to compete for adult love or worry about whether her needs would be met consistently. As I carried her upstairs to her bedroom, I realized that Mom's documented cruelty during Emma's birth had accidentally given us the most valuable gift possible, the knowledge that love worth having was love that showed up, especially when showing up was inconvenient. Emma would grow up with that knowledge as her foundation,
surrounded by people who'd proven its truth through their actions every day of her life. The nursery I tucked her into was nothing like the one I'd originally planned, filled with gifts from people I'd never expected to love her, decorated with photos of chosen family,
celebrations, and warmed by the security that came from knowing that every adult in her life had already proven their priorities through their choices during difficult moments. Mom had meant to teach me a lesson about realistic expectations and independence during Emma's birth. Instead, she taught me something much more valuable, that family worth having was family that chose you every day, that love worth trusting was love that showed up during inconvenient moments, and that children deserved to grow up secure in the knowledge that the adults in their lives would never make them compete with money for attention and care. Emma would know that truth from birth, surrounded by people who'd proven it through their choices, protected by policies and programs that existed because her story had helped change how institutions thought about family support during vulnerable moments. In the end, Mom's abandonment during Emma's birth hadn't just revealed who she really was, it had revealed who we really were, and who we were capable of becoming when we chose love over convenience, presence over profit, and each other over everything else that claimed to matter more. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.